Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here. In this update, we're going to give you an overview of the month of February. You can see where we stood for January. We only have about 5 days left, and that Arctic blast really did its number across a good part of the lower 48. We are going to be getting a rebound over the next 5 days, but predominantly a good part of the lower 48 is going to end below average. And so we've had some wild swings. And definitely looks like February continues with those wild swings as well. So I appreciate all my subscribers out there. If you are new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. I'm here on a daily basis, putting out a lot of content to keep you well ahead of the storm. So let's take a look at the setup for the next 5 days. We are coming out of that deep freeze, if you will. A lot of areas, even DC hit record temperatures, 80 degrees yesterday. That warm continues. We are dealing with still some heavier rain and some severe storms into the southeast. That will end with some snow showers into the northeast. Predominantly for the next 5 days, it's going to be all about the big warm up that's going to take place to end the month of January. And all the colder air is going to be bottled up there into Greenland as well as into Alaska for the next 5 days. And overall, the summary of the precipitation to end January is going to be that all that flooding rains that we saw down here in Texas through the southeast, we are going to continue to see for the next day or two as this system will be slowly moving out. But you can see on the back side of that, we have a lot of drying conditions. So we are expecting a fairly calmer week ahead going into that end of the month of January. But you can see what's lurking back behind it. That's the beginning stages of an atmospheric river event that's going to be in full effect almost the entire month of January. So we've got a lot of ups and downs. We've got a lot of big swings and a lot of interesting weather coming for the month of February. So we're going to delve into the forecast. But first, a word from my sponsor.
Are you a parent like me seeking a beacon to light up your child's educational path? Introducing Brilliant, today's video sponsor. It's not just a learning platform. It's a forecast of discovery that's fun, hands-on, and interactive. Picture your child learning by doing. Every lesson like a spark of inspiration in the forecast. Whatever your educational forecast, Brilliant customizes content like a skilled guide, allowing you to solve problems at your own pace. And you know what we love? It's not just about learning. It's about nurturing a mindset for lifelong learners. Brilliant is an essential tool for advancing your educational adventure. Whether you're a student or a professional, you can navigate the landscape and level up your skills to become the go-to person in your field. Master big concepts in as little as 15 minutes a day. It's like finding shortcuts in your educational terrain. Learn anywhere, anytime on your phone, tablet, or computer. With guided learning paths, your educational forecast stays clear for high velocity learning. Brilliant is an intuitive, hands-on, challenging, and it teaches new skills from basic to advanced. I'm forecasting 100% chance of learning success. Get started with a free 30-day trial. And guess what? The first 200 of you to visit brilliant.org/pal get an exclusive 20% off an annual plan. Visit brilliant.org/pal and let the educational journey begin.
Let's talk about this forecast. We've been dealing with this El Nino. In fact, it actually started back on June the 8th, and we saw El Nino type conditions. In fact, it went strong criteria at one point, but it's slowly going southbound and it's in its weakening phase. So right now we are predominantly in a moderate, I would say even a weak El Nino. So we are expected to continue to have El Nino effects, at least for the next couple of months. But definitely as we get towards that springtime, say that April timeframe, we are expected with the latest update to go into that more or less neutral phase. And a lot of times when you come out of that El Nino or even the La Nina, that tends to be a much more active, severe storm spring season. So I'm definitely expecting that. But look at the trend. It continues, and all bets increase the odds that, hey, we're going to be back into another La Nina by the time we get into the heart of summer. So yes, definitely lots of ups and downs, but The major player is what's going to unfold in the month of January is just this active subtropical atmospheric jet stream out there into the Pacific. You can see it definitely starts to get active out there. It's got an increased amount of precipitation. This is typically what you see in the month of February. It's its lowest point it's going to be all year long. And for those areas across the south, I'm expecting a lot of precipitation. And this is typically when you see the potential, if you can mix some of that colder air in, along with those west systems, if you are going to be seeing wintry precipitation across the south and into the southeast and into the Carolinas, this is the month you would typically see it if that is going to occur. And I'm seeing some increased likelihoods that's likely going to happen. So let's talk about this setup, because here's the EPO. So you can see the ridge, it's going to be building, starting to build up there, and then the EPO definitely turns negative, right? It starts to trend negative as we get into that month of February, but predominantly you can see the trend around that 4th and 5th time frame. That first full official week of February, the EPO definitely turns negative, and you can see the trend of those colder temperatures start to come back into the lower 48, and that continues into the second week of February as we trend to get colder. So here's the setup for that first week, right? So you've got all the colder air right now up there in Greenland, up there in Alaska. They're going to be hitting 40, 50, 60 below zero up there. But it's a completely different story once you get into that first week of February, where the ridge just overtakes Alaska and starts to come out of portions of the lower 48. The EPO goes negative. You got the active subtropical jet pulling in all that abundant amounts of moisture. So you've got an increased likelihood of heavy rainfall, snow into the higher elevations, and those below average temperatures start to impact the West Coast. And you can see further south that starts to infiltrate those areas across the south and much of the southeast, and trying to ride up those systems up into the East Coast. So that's your temperature anomalies. And look at the jet stream, right? So we talked about it's getting pretty far south, and it is going to be pretty far south. It's the further south it's going to be for the entire year. And yes, with that, all that elevated precipitation that's going to be moving in from the Pacific and then activating that subtropical jet, some of that Canadian air is going to be coming down from Alaska. The ridge warms up, so all that colder air gets trapped underneath, and then you got the lowering of the jet stream underneath, and that definitely sets the stage for these storm tracks to pull even further south. So you can see once we get into that first deep full week of the month of February there, yeah, we see an abundance amount of moisture starting to impact the West Coast. And look how far south it gets, all the way down into Southern California, through the Four Corners regions, through the Rockies. That would be heavy snows that move through Idaho into Nevada here, into Utah, back into the Rockies as well. And some of that precipitation will start to impact Texas and Oklahoma, back here into Kansas and Nebraska, along with tapping into that more active subtropical jet stream. So what does that do to the storm track? It pulls it further south. Remember, a predominant storm track we dealt with into the month of January was these systems that came out of the Rockies, pulled into the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, and then swung up through northwestern Missouri, and then swung up here to northern Illinois. Now that the jet stream's lowering, that shifts the storm track a little bit further south as we get into February, and that puts the snow further south as well. So the Climate Prediction Center is already having this heavy snows, and this is the EPS ensembles of the snowfall estimates into that first full week of February. So I wouldn't take this verbatim. I'm just kind of showing you more or less the predominant storm track as we get deeper into the month of February, and this would likely be lowering as we get deeper into that month of February as well. So it definitely looks more interesting for those areas across the south that you're looking for any type of wintry precipitation. You definitely have increased likelihoods, and your favorability increases with what's going to be coming on the table. Because if you look at the overall 500 millibar and some of these height anomalies going into that second week of February, that just increases it even further as the ridge continues to push further back up there in Canada. The further north it gets, that traps more cold underneath in the lower 48, tapping into that more active subtropical jet stream, and that pulls more colder air into the lower 48 into that second week of February. So you can see the ridge even by then pulling a little bit further north, right? So now we're talking those areas. Most of the lower 48 is not going to be dominated under that ridge of high pressure into that second week of February, but much of the lower tiers and the well above average anomalies pull underneath that subtropical jet through the Four Corners regions, run it right through Texas and right through the Southeast as well, with those well below average temperature anomalies that are coming on board. So, and you can see the precipitation, right? That's a steady stream. That is El Nino setup all day long. With the much more active subtropical jet, you have a less active polar jet over the top. This one becomes a lot more activated, and especially look how far south it gets into Southern California, through Arizona, through New Mexico, all the way through Texas, into Louisiana, through Mississippi and Alabama, back into Georgia, and up here into the Carolinas. So as that colder air continues to drain in from Canada and traps in underneath, again, the storm track is alive and well. So once this thing gets going, it looks to deepen and actually intensify the deeper we get. And once we get into that second half of February, definitely increases a lot more probability to see more increased rain amounts, more increased wintry precipitation across the southern plains, potentially in the southeast by then. We'll have to watch this corridor. But I think once we get into that second week of that middle part of February there, I think the Northeast will be a little bit more favorable to get these storm tracks, because by then we'll have most of the ridging out of the lower 48 by then. It'll be all trapped up there in Canada, all up there in Greenland, and all up there into Alaska there. And much of the colder, much of the cooling, the deeper, below average temperature anomalies will include much of the lower 48 as we get into that February 16th through that 23rd time frame of February. And if we take a look at the overall update from the Climate Prediction Center, kind of implying that they came out last night, starting into that second week, going into that middle point of February, into that third week, it sees it, right? It sees some ridging starting to come back across the Pacific Northwest. It has Alaska well above average temperatures. That traps the colder air underneath. That pulls the cooler anomalies even into that February 10th through that February 23rd time frame. For much of the South, much of the Southern Plains, much of the Southeast, into the Tennessee Valley, and tries to ride up to the East Coast, includes the Carolinas, and eventually this will be making it up there into the Northeast with those cooler anomalies, and the jet stream continues to remain active. So once this thing gets going, there's definitely not much stopping. So we're basically talking about increased likelihood for well above average precipitation during that time frame, and almost pretty much the entire month of February. It looks to be that southern corridor right around that that subtropical jet. And of course you've got below average temperatures, and so that just increases the likelihood as these storms will be traversing across from west to east of including those areas further south that you don't see wintry precipitation. We'll be fine-tuning this on a daily basis as we get into that February month. But overall, it definitely looks wet and it looks cold, and that continues into that last week of February. So the ridge, more or less, once it starts to get bottled up there, it definitely appears to be it's going to be trapped for an extended period of time, and the jet stream continues to be alive and well. And the shift from the west to central and now towards the east as we get into that last week of February is going to be predominantly over the southeast. through the Carolinas and through up there into the Northeast, through those areas into the Ohio Valley as well. But overall, that last week of February does include the cold as well. So it continues to look definitely cold, even extended into that last week of February, as the ridge will still be building up there in Canada, locked over Greenland, locked over Alaska, trapping those cooler anomalies well underneath into the lower 48. And you going into that overall 30-day. So if you sum it up, even with the ridge predominantly over a good part of the lower 48, that first week of February, it's still, if you do the math, all the month. And we actually get an extra day because you got leap year coming up, and we get the February 29th this year, so we'll have an extra day, 29 days. Of course, January had 31 days. But overall, it definitely appears, if you sum it all up, much of the west and much of the south, much of the southwest, much of the southern plains, much of the southeast, as well as even good part of the northeast as well, looks to be on the below average temperature side. It's really just those areas across the middle of the country where you're less affected, and where that ridge is predominantly going to be dominating for those next 30 days up there in Canada. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update where I protect you before and after the storm.